Have you ever seen a dog pass away or another animal die? Ever watch that peaceful feeling that they seem to have? It's almost like they're just resting, and even though they're in pain, maybe, but they just have this transitional thing where it's like they're easing into it. And it's interesting to me that the feeling that goes associated with that is actually, for me, is noticing that they just integrate. They start blending in and start melting, if you will, into everything. You know, people talk about, ghosts, and they talk about spirits and spirit guides, and they talk about all these different things. But, there's a lot of a story. If you notice, there's a story in so many situations. Like I could say for the dog passing away, I could sit there and I could look at that dog passing away, and I could make up a story as to what that dog's thinking and what it's experiencing. But it doesn't have that. It's actually quite beautiful. It's very sad because we're going to miss our companion and our sweet, loving, wonderful friend. But it's beautiful. You ever watch how a tree gives up its life to a chainsaw? Or how plants or trees succumb to pruning and so on? Or any one of nature's unstory-rich items, whatever that might be. Something that doesn't have a story, something that isn't making up a story. Ever just watch it? It transitions in a way that, or it doesn't even transition. It's not even a good word, but it just integrates. In other words, its integration is more apparent. We're sitting here looking at this body of a cute little dog, and it's still got a little life in it, and it's passing away, and we watch it integrate, and we watch it, transitioning. In our minds, it was our little friend that was here, and then our friend is gone. But is our friend really gone? When we think about, again, going back to the spirit guides and the spirits and so on, you ever been in a room where somebody has been in that room before? You know that person that was in that room before, and you can feel their presence. Have you ever touched something that belonged to somebody else and you could feel their presence in that thing? That little residual spiritual energy is an intelligence that resides with that item. So coming back, we see that little residual spiritual energy in that item. We feel that. We can as much as know who it was, and not just in knowing who it was, but we receive a lot of encoding. There's a lot of information encoded in that experience. And there are people that can experience a lot, even not knowing that person. They can have an experience with an item or with a place when somebody's been there, and they can feel and know a lot about that person. And that's the kind of that residual energy that comes through and that passes through, that is integrated in all things. When we're talking about integrating with all things, we're talking about that energy. that our spiritual energy eventually will integrate with all things, but yet we will be able to be tapped into. So if you looked at like, well, my experience was I had this awesome experience. I've said it in other recordings before, but I had this really awesome experience where I saw my friend not being disintegrated, I guess, or integrating, or his energy or his spirit integrating with everything around him. And I realized, oh my goodness, that's what that was. That was that experience that I've been having all my life. I started to notice that all things do that, especially when they die, as we would call dying. Their body separates from their spirit, and their spirit integrates with everything, and so does the body. And you start to see that, and you go, at first there can be somewhat of a panic, kind of a feeling as if you're going to, explore this idea, you're going to feel like, oh my gosh, I'm actually disintegrating. I'm actually leaving or losing this or whatever. I'm losing my identity and who I am, but that's not the case. When we disintegrate, when we actually integrate, I say disintegrate. It's crazy. We disintegrate as far as what we're looking at from this perspective, but we integrate from a spiritual sense. So as it integrates in all these things, it starts to be even more available. So our friend, say, that passes away, depending on how we're how we're tuning in, we're actually able to integrate with that person even more. So like, we see things with our eyes, and we feel them with our hands, and we talk to people, and we have this outer experience going on. But then if we settled in to a different way of perceiving and understanding this integration with all things, and we start to look at things from a fully expanded sense, where we've expanded ourselves out and allowed ourselves to perceive how integrated we are with everything around us, then we start to see the in-depth. So as I was seeing my friend, I was having an experience with him that I couldn't have by talking with him, or by the typical tactile relationship, or verbal, or even in a spiritual experience or whatever. I could never have had that. It was so readily everything present in that moment, seeing him, understanding him, and knowing him, and all the details of life were erased in a way and made perfect into this perfect array of light and beauty. And the interesting thing is, I don't know what other people experience with that too. When they see that kind of in it, when they see themselves fully expanded, or they see life fully expanded into everything that it is, and they start to notice that if they pay attention, when they have those experiences, they can start to see how everything just loses its definition, and then by that loses its boundaries, and by that becomes limitless, and by that becomes fully absorbable, if you will. I mean, if you think about it, it just reminds me, it's kind of a silly example, but like Dad said, chew your food 36 times or whatever. And I do chew it a lot, pretty close to that. And it's because it assimilates into your body, and it breaks down all the definition of that food, right? And it allows the nutrients to assimilate into your body. And that's what being fully integrated or expanded does, is it allows you to fully assimilate everything around you. Everything, you see starts to exist on that plane and not in this as much. Well, it always exists in this other realm too, because we know what's happening. Um, at least it's our interpretation of what's happening. And it exists, but at the same time, this other plane where we are fully integrated, it really does. It really does exist. And the interesting thing is there's no real way to put a definition on it or a description on it. It's an experiential thing. But I think it would take away. If I sit here and try to describe my experience with it, then it's going to take away from somebody else's experience. It's going to try to call like one of those teachings was talking about. Can't remember who said it. That's typical me, which I'm fine with, by the way. But a teacher said that, you tell a child, he sees a bird, and you tell the child, that's a bird. Now, forevermore, the child learns that's a bird. It loses its awe in that experience. So no longer is the bird like this wondrous flying creature or whatever you want to call it. Now it's a bird, and it's been simplified. It's been put in a file, and on top of the file in the tab, it says bird, and everything related to that is in that file. But the ready experience of that typical on a moment-to-moment basis is now just by the tab, bird. And if I was to even be able to explain my experience with integration and expandedness, I would be taking away from somebody else's experience. I actually go and visit it when I say it to you. I actually go there and I can experience it again and again. It's just absolutely beautiful. And that's a good way to describe it, because you have your own idea of beautiful and I have mine. And it's just a really nice, wonderful thing. And so off to do other things. And those are my thoughts for now.